Hey guys, tonight we're exploring one of history's strangest mysteries. Why did millions of people willingly sleep inside wooden boxes, tiny closets, and even upright chairs for hundreds of years? It may sound impossible today, but for much of human history, climbing into a soft mattress wasn't normal at all. Instead, families squeezed together inside enclosed bed boxes. Travelers slept sitting almost upright, and many people believed lying completely flat could actually be dangerous. Along the way, we'll discover why medieval homes looked so different at night, how freezing winters shaped the beds people built, and why sleeping comfortably was once considered a luxury reserved for only a fortunate few. But before we settle in, if you enjoy these peaceful journeys through the stranger side of history, please consider subscribing. And if you're listening tonight, I'd love to know where you're joining from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's travel back to a time when a wooden box was considered one of the safest and coziest places a person could sleep. Imagine, for a moment, that the sun has disappeared behind a distant line of hills. The last traces of daylight have faded from the windows, and somewhere beyond the walls of a small house, the evening air has grown cold. Inside, a single candle trembles beside a wooden table. Its flame is small, almost fragile. The room around it is not a bedroom, at least not in the way we would recognize one today. There is no quiet hallway leading toward a private sleeping chamber, no soft mattress waiting beneath layers of clean sheets, no separate room where every member of the household can close a door and be alone. Instead, the home is one warm, crowded space filled with the faint sounds of breathing, shifting blankets, creaking timber, and the occasional whisper from someone who has not yet fallen asleep. And somewhere in this dim interior stands a strange piece of furniture. It looks almost like a cupboard, a wooden structure, enclosed on several sides, with a narrow opening at the front. But this is not a place for storing clothing, it is a bed. Someone will climb inside soon, perhaps a farmer exhausted from the day's work, perhaps a mother settling down beside her children, perhaps an entire family gathered together against the cold. The little wooden enclosure offers something precious. Warmth. The walls hold back the drafts that slip through gaps in the house. They create a small pocket of darkness where the body can finally relax. Outside, winter presses against the building, the wind moves across empty fields, frost gathers along the edges of windows, but inside the wooden bed, the night feels slightly less threatening. This was one of the quiet inventions that shaped the history of sleep. Because human beings have never simply slept wherever they happened to fall. For thousands of years, people have searched for ways to make the night safer, warmer, and more comfortable. Sometimes they slept on mats, sometimes on straw, sometimes on raised platforms. And sometimes, they built entire structures around themselves, almost as though they were constructing a small house within their house. The reasons were surprisingly practical. Cold was one, privacy was another, and then there was the mysterious world of nighttime itself. Before electric lights transformed the darkness, night was a much larger presence in human life. When the sun went down, the world became quieter, but it did not become empty. The shadows outside the window seemed deeper, the forest seemed closer, every creak of timber could be heard. Every gust of wind became noticeable. In such a world, an enclosed sleeping space offered a sense of protection. It separated the sleeper from the cold darkness beyond the walls. But there was another reason people experimented with unusual sleeping positions and spaces. For centuries, many societies carried beliefs about what happened to the body during sleep. Some people were uneasy about lying completely flat, others believed certain positions were healthier, and in crowded homes, There was often little choice anyway. You slept where there was room. You shared what was available. You adapted. The history of sleep, then, is not simply a history of beds. It is a history of survival, architecture, climate, belief, and human ingenuity. The strange wooden boxes and narrow sleeping spaces of the past were not necessarily signs of discomfort. To the people who used them, they could represent security. A little warmth, a little privacy, a place to disappear into when the long night arrived. And as we slowly move deeper into this forgotten world, we will discover that the story becomes even stranger, because the wooden box was only the beginning. Long before enclosed beds became familiar in certain parts of Europe, people were already wondering about something much simpler: whether sleeping flat on the ground was truly the safest way to rest at all. And once that question entered the human imagination, the shape of the bed would never be quite the same again. The candle has burned lower now. Its flame leans gently whenever a draft finds its way through the wooden walls, and somewhere inside the quiet house, someone turns beneath a heavy blanket. Outside, the darkness has settled completely, but before we follow that darkness into the strange sleeping habits of the past, we need to pause beside an idea that may seem almost impossible to us now: the belief that lying down flat might not be the best way to sleep. Today, most people barely think about it. We climb into bed, stretch our legs, place our heads on a pillow, and allow our bodies to become horizontal without a second thought. But for many people in earlier centuries, sleep was surrounded by questions. How should the body be positioned? Where should the head rest? Was it better to sleep on one side or the other? And perhaps most importantly, was it safe to surrender completely to the darkness by lying flat? These questions did not have one universal answer. Different cultures developed different beliefs, and those beliefs changed over time. Some ancient medical traditions recommended particular sleeping positions according to the body's balance. Certain people preferred sleeping on their side, others rested with their upper bodies slightly raised, and in crowded homes, practical necessity often mattered more than medical advice, yet the fear of lying flat had deeper roots than simple comfort. For ancient people, the human body was mysterious. Every breath was noticed, every illness seemed to have a hidden cause. Sleep itself could feel like a strange state between life and death. The sleeper lay motionless. The eyes were closed, the breathing became slow, the person could not easily respond to the world around them. Without modern knowledge of the brain and nervous system, it was natural for people to wonder what exactly happened when consciousness disappeared. Some cultures believed that the soul traveled during sleep, others feared that dreams carried warnings, and in certain traditions, the boundary between sleeping and dying could feel uncomfortably close. This did not mean everyone was terrified of going to bed. Far from it. Sleep was necessary, comforting, and deeply valued, but the nighttime world carried uncertainties that modern people rarely experience. Imagine lying awake in a small room hundreds or thousands of years ago. There is no electric light, no glowing screen, no distant traffic, only the sound of wind moving through trees, the occasional cry of an animal, the soft breathing of people sleeping nearby. If you were lying completely flat, your view of the room would disappear into darkness, but if your upper body was raised, perhaps by folded blankets, cushions, or a wooden support, you might feel more secure. You could breathe more easily, you could sit up quickly, and you could see the room around you. That simple feeling of awareness mattered. There were also practical reasons why some people preferred sleeping in a raised position. People suffering from certain illnesses may have found it easier to breathe with their heads elevated. Others may have experienced discomfort after eating heavily before bed. Ancient physicians sometimes discussed sleep positions as part of their broader ideas about health. Their explanations were often very different from modern medicine, but the basic observation was familiar. The position of the body could affect how a person felt. Over time, these ideas became mixed with custom. A sleeping posture that once began as a practical choice could eventually become associated with tradition, respectability, or even morality, and this is where history becomes especially interesting, because the way people slept was never only about the body, it was also about the world they believed they inhabited. The bed itself could become a symbol of safety, the sleeping position could become a matter of habit. And the architecture surrounding the sleeper could quietly reflect the fears of an entire society. In some places, people slept on raised platforms. In others, they curled beneath thick blankets. Elsewhere, enclosed sleeping spaces became increasingly common. The goal was often the same: to create a small protected world inside the larger darkness, a place where cold air could be kept outside, where unfamiliar sounds could be softened, where the sleeper could close their eyes without feeling completely exposed. And perhaps this explains why the enclosed bed was such a powerful idea. A normal bed simply gives the body somewhere to rest. A box bed does something more. It surrounds the sleeper. It creates walls, a ceiling, a doorway. For a few quiet hours, the person inside becomes almost invisible. The outside world continues to exist, but it feels farther away. And once people discovered how comforting that enclosure could be, they began building sleeping spaces that looked less like beds and more like small wooden rooms. The next step in our journey takes us into one of the most fascinating examples of this idea: the box bed, a strange piece of furniture that could be warm, private, practical, and sometimes surprisingly beautiful, all at the same time. The house has grown quieter now. The last candlelight rests softly against the wooden walls, and beyond the small window, the night has become a deep, unbroken darkness. Inside, however, there is still one place where warmth remains. A narrow wooden enclosure stands against the wall. At first glance, it might be mistaken for a cupboard, perhaps somewhere to store blankets, or clothing, or old household belongings that have nowhere else to go. But there is something unusual about it. A small opening reveals a space hidden behind timber doors, and inside that space, there is a bed. For centuries, in parts of Europe, the box bed offered an answer to one of the oldest problems of human life. How do you stay warm when your home is cold? The idea was wonderfully simple. Instead of placing a bed in the open room, where cold air could move freely around the sleeper, people enclosed it within wooden walls. Sometimes only the front remained open. Sometimes doors or curtains could be pulled across the entrance. The result was a tiny sleeping chamber built directly into the main living space. It was not grand, it was not spacious, but it was practical. And in a world where keeping warm through the night could be a serious challenge, practicality mattered. Imagine stepping inside one of these homes on a winter evening. The floor is hard beneath your feet. The walls are thick but imperfect. Cold air finds its way through small gaps between the boards. The fire has already begun to weaken. There is no central heating waiting to keep every corner of the house comfortable. The warmest air gathers near the hearth, while the edges of the room slowly surrender to the cold. Then there is the box bed. Inside, the atmosphere feels different. The wooden walls hold the warmth of the human body. Heavy blankets trap the heat. The enclosed space becomes a little pocket of comfort. Perhaps several people sleep together inside, a husband and wife, children, sometimes even several members of an extended household. The box bed was not always designed for privacy in the modern sense. It was often a solution to limited space a household needed to make every part of the home useful, and when night arrived, furniture could serve several purposes at once. During the day, The enclosed structure might simply appear as part of the room. At night, it transformed. A doorway opened, blankets were arranged, and the ordinary wooden cabinet became a sleeping chamber. There was something almost comforting about this transformation. The house itself seemed to change personality after sunset. The table became quiet, the cooking fire dimmed, the chairs were pushed aside, and the box bed opened like a hidden secret. In some regions, these beds were surprisingly elaborate. Carpenters decorated them with carved panels. Families painted the wood. Others added curtains or doors. A wealthy household might turn the sleeping enclosure into an attractive piece of furniture, but even the simplest box bed had a certain intimacy. It created boundaries. The sleeper was no longer lying exposed in the middle of a large room. The wooden walls offered a sense of separation, a little darkness, a little quiet, and perhaps, most importantly, a little warmth. Yet the box bed also tells us something about how different the meaning of privacy once was. Today, many people imagine the bedroom as a personal territory, a place belonging to one individual or perhaps one couple. But in earlier homes, the idea of private space was often much smaller. A bed might be shared, a room might serve several purposes, and a household could spend most of its waking and sleeping hours together. The box bed created privacy without requiring an entire room. It was a compromise between togetherness and separation, a small wooden world inside a larger one, and there was another advantage. The enclosure could make the sleeper feel protected from the unpredictable environment. Beyond, wind could howl outside, rain could strike the roof, snow could cover the ground. But behind the wooden panels, the night seemed farther away. Of course, not everyone loved these beds. They could be cramped, air circulation was limited, getting in and out required some effort, and if several people shared the same space, privacy remained limited. Still, for many families, the advantages outweighed the inconveniences. The box bed was not necessarily a symbol of poverty. It could be a clever response to the realities of life, a way to conserve warmth, a way to use limited space, a way to create a sleeping chamber without building another room. And as we move through history, we begin to notice something fascinating. The human desire for enclosure appears again and again. People built sleeping spaces inside walls, behind curtains, under canopies, and sometimes in structures so narrow and enclosed that they almost resembled cupboards. The box bed had shown that a sleeping space did not need to be large to feel safe, and soon, in certain homes, the boundary between a bed and a closet would become even harder to distinguish, because some people would begin sleeping inside spaces that looked, at first glance, like nothing more than wooden storage cupboards. The box bed has disappeared into the darkness now. Only the faintest glow from the dying hearth remains, tracing the edges of its wooden panels before fading into shadow. But there is something curious about this little sleeping chamber. It looks almost like a cupboard, and that resemblance was not accidental. As people searched for better ways to protect themselves from cold, noise, and crowded living conditions, the boundary between furniture and architecture became wonderfully blurred. A bed could be a room could become a cupboard, and a cupboard, with enough space inside, could become a place to sleep. Imagine walking through a small historical home during the quiet hours before dawn. The household is still, the fire has almost gone out, a wooden cabinet stands against the wall, its doors are closed. From the outside, nothing seems unusual. Perhaps it contains blankets, perhaps tools, perhaps household possessions that are rarely used. But behind those wooden panels, someone is sleeping. This idea may sound strange to us because modern furniture is usually designed with very specific purposes. A wardrobe holds clothing, a cupboard stores dishes, a bed is for Sleeping, but older homes were not always so neatly divided. Space was valuable, materials were expensive, and people often had to make their surroundings serve more than one purpose. A sleeping cupboard could therefore become an ingenious solution. The enclosed space was smaller than a conventional room, but that was precisely its advantage. A small space was easier to warm, a wooden enclosure could block drafts, and when the doors were closed, the sleeper gained a little separation from the rest of the household. For someone living in a crowded home, that small amount of privacy could feel surprisingly precious. There was also something psychological about being surrounded by wood. The walls created a boundary between the sleeping person and the open room. During the day, the house might feel busy, children might move through the space, people might cook, repair tools, talk, and work, but when the wooden doors closed, the sounds became distant. The sleeper entered a small world of darkness. The air inside would be warm from the bodies resting there. Blankets would be tucked tightly around the shoulders, and the outside world would become little more than muffled sounds, perhaps rain tapping against the roof, perhaps footsteps crossing the floor, perhaps the quiet crackle of the fire. For some people, this arrangement offered genuine comfort, but sleeping inside such an enclosed space also required careful consideration. Ventilation mattered. The air could become stale, smoke from fireplaces could drift through the home, and in a world without modern knowledge of indoor air quality, people simply learned through experience. They adjusted doors, they left small openings, they designed gaps that allowed air to move while still preserving warmth. The sleeping cupboard was therefore not always completely sealed. It was an enclosed space, but one that still had to breathe, and perhaps that is one reason these structures are so fascinating. They reveal how ordinary people solved ordinary problems with remarkable creativity. No architect needed to design a separate bedroom, no heating system needed to warm the entire house. Instead, people created a tiny environment that suited the human body: a few wooden boards, a mattress of straw or fabric, several blankets, a door, and suddenly, a corner of the home became a private sleeping chamber. In some places, these sleeping spaces were built into the walls themselves. In others, they stood as large pieces of furniture. Some were simple and rough, others were beautifully carved, decorated, and passed through generations. The appearance changed from region to region, but the basic idea remained surprisingly consistent. The sleeper did not need an enormous room. They needed somewhere protected, somewhere warm, somewhere they could retreat from the cold night. There is also a quiet irony in this history. Today, people often dream of larger homes, more rooms, higher ceilings, more space between one person and another. Yet for much of history, comfort often came from the opposite direction. The smaller the space, the easier it was to heat. The closer the family, the easier it was to share warmth. The thicker the wooden walls, the safer the sleeper might feel. A tiny sleeping chamber could therefore become more desirable than a large, empty room. And as the centuries passed, people discovered another unusual way to make sleeping more comfortable. They did not always build a separate sleeping enclosure at all. Sometimes, they simply changed the position of the body. Instead of stretching out beneath the blankets, they remained seated. A chair, a bench, or a specially designed sleeping seat could become a place to spend the night. At first, it might have been a practical solution, but gradually, sleeping upright began to appear in stories, traditions, and everyday habits. And this brings us to another curious chapter in the history of human rest, a time when the chair itself became a bed. The wooden doors have closed, the little sleeping chamber has vanished behind its panels, leaving only a quiet outline in the darkness. But not everyone had such a space. Not every home could accommodate a box bed, not every traveler could find a proper mattress, and not every person wanted to lie completely flat for an entire night. So, in the dim world before modern bedrooms, another solution appeared: the chair. At first, the idea seems almost uncomfortable. A chair is made for sitting. It supports the body for a while, but eventually the back begins to ache, the legs grow heavy, and the head searches for somewhere to rest. Yet throughout history, people have slept in positions that would seem unusual today. Sometimes they leaned against cushions, sometimes they rested in high-backed wooden chairs, sometimes they slept partially upright, their bodies supported by pillows, folded blankets, or the surrounding furniture, and for certain people, this was not an occasional accident, it became a familiar way of spending the night. One reason was simple: there was not always enough space for everyone to lie down. In a crowded household, beds belonged to those who needed them most. Children might share one mattress, guests might sleep wherever an empty corner could be found, a traveler arriving late might have no bed waiting at all. In such circumstances, a chair could suddenly become valuable. It offered a raised surface, a backrest, a little support, and perhaps most importantly, a place to rest without taking up much room. Imagine a small inn after midnight. The fire has burned low, most of the guests have disappeared behind curtains or into narrow sleeping spaces, but one traveler remains awake. Perhaps the inn is full, perhaps the roads were crowded that evening, perhaps the traveler has arrived too late. There is no empty bed, so, near the fading fire, he finds a sturdy wooden chair. He wraps his cloak around his shoulders, his head leans gently against the wall. The room is quiet. The candlelight trembles, and eventually, exhaustion does what comfort cannot. It carries him into sleep. For travelers, sleeping upright could be a practical necessity. Long journeys were difficult, roads were slow, lodging was unpredictable. And even when an inn had available beds, they were often shared with strangers. A chair might not have been comfortable, but it was familiar. It gave the traveler a place to rest while remaining close to their belongings. There were also health beliefs surrounding sleeping positions. Historical medical traditions sometimes recommended keeping the upper body elevated. People suffering from breathing difficulties may have naturally preferred a raised position. Others may have found that sleeping upright reduced discomfort. Of course, these practices varied greatly. There was no single rule followed by everyone, but the idea that posture could influence sleep was widespread enough to shape furniture. Some chairs were designed with tall backs, some had wide arms, others could be adjusted or combined with cushions. Over time, furniture makers learned that a chair did not always have to serve one purpose. A piece of furniture could become a place to read, rest, pray, converse, or sleep. This flexibility was especially important in homes where every object had to earn its place. A chair that could support a tired person at night was more useful than one designed only for daytime sitting. And there was another unexpected reason why some people preferred to sleep upright: fear, not necessarily fear of anything specific, rather, a general feeling of vulnerability that could accompany deep sleep. To lie completely flat was to surrender more fully to unconsciousness. A seated position, by contrast, made it easier to wake. A person could hear footsteps, notice a change in the room, respond quickly if something unexpected happened. In an age when homes were often shared with animals, strangers, and large families, this awareness could feel reassuring. Yet chair sleeping was not always associated with poverty or necessity. In certain wealthy households, comfortable reclining chairs became symbols of status. The ability to rest without lying on a simple mattress could be a sign of luxury. Soft cushions were expensive, fine upholstery required skilled labor. A large wooden chair with padded arms could represent considerable wealth, and so, once again, the history of sleep refuses to fit neatly into one category. A chair might be a last resort for a tired traveler, or a luxurious object belonging to someone who could afford comfort. It might be used because there was no room, or because the sleeper simply preferred it. But whether the chair was humble or magnificent, the experience shared one remarkable feature: it kept the human body close to the vertical world. The sleeper never completely disappeared into the bed, they remained connected to the room around them. Perhaps that is why the image feels so haunting, a quiet figure sitting beside a dying fire, head bowed, hands folded, eyes closed, while the entire household sleeps nearby. And yet, in many historical homes, even a chair could offer more privacy than a person might expect, because the bedroom itself was not always a private place. In fact, the farther we travel into the past, the more we discover that sleeping alone was often the exception rather than the rule. Behind the walls of ordinary homes, beds were shared, rooms were crowded, and the night belonged to everyone. The private bedroom we know today was still a long way away, waiting quietly in the future. The chair beside the dying fire has finally become still. The traveler sleeps quietly, wrapped in his cloak, while the last warmth of the hearth fades into the stone floor. But if we were to leave that quiet corner of the inn and step into an ordinary medieval home, we would discover something unexpected. The sleeping world was rarely private. In fact, for many people, the idea of having an entire room devoted to sleep would have seemed wonderfully luxurious. Today, a bedroom often feels like a personal retreat. A door can be closed, the lights can be turned off, the bed belongs to one person, or perhaps one couple, but medieval homes were often organized very differently. The average household had limited space. A single room might serve several purposes throughout the day. People cooked there, worked there, ate there, talked there, and eventually, they slept there. When night arrived, the room did not suddenly transform into a collection of private bedrooms. Instead, everyone simply settled into whatever sleeping arrangements were available. The elderly might have their own place, parents might share a bed. Children might sleep beside them. A servant could find a corner near the hearth. A traveler might be given a space on the floor, and animals, especially in poorer homes, might be kept nearby. The boundaries between living and sleeping were wonderfully blurred. Imagine the interior of a modest medieval house after sunset. The cooking is finished, the bowls have been cleared, the fire burns quietly. One by one, the household begins preparing for sleep. A child curls beneath a blanket, someone spreads a straw-filled mattress across the floor, another person climbs into a narrow wooden bed. There is conversation at first. A few whispered words, a cough, the soft rustling of fabric. Then, slowly, the room becomes quieter, but it never becomes completely silent. There are too many people, too many small sounds. Someone turns over, a floorboard creaks, the fire collapses inward, a sleeping child murmurs, someone else wakes briefly, listens to the darkness, and closes their eyes again. This was normal. Sleep was a communal experience. And although it may sound uncomfortable to modern ears, sharing space had its own advantages. A crowded room was warmer. Human bodies produced heat, animals added warmth. The fire, if carefully maintained, could keep the cold from becoming unbearable. Privacy was sacrificed. But survival often came first. There was also a practical reason for keeping people together. A household was an economic unit. People worked together, they ate together, they shared resources, and naturally, they often slept within the same space. Separate rooms required more construction, more walls, more doors, more fuel to heat, more furniture. For ordinary families, such luxuries were simply unnecessary. Even wealthier households did not always resemble modern homes. Large houses could have many rooms, but those rooms served different purposes. A great hall might be the center of daily life. Private chambers existed for some members of the household, yet servants and workers could still sleep in shared spaces. The idea of privacy was closely connected to social status. The more important a person was, the more likely they were to have a sleeping space of their own, and this difference became especially visible in the homes of the wealthy. A noble family might possess a grand bed surrounded by curtains, a servant might sleep nearby, guests might occupy another chamber, but even then, sleeping arrangements were often far more crowded than we would imagine. A bed could contain more than one person. Children might sleep alongside adults, visitors might share the same room. The boundaries between family and household staff could remain surprisingly close, and yet, this closeness was not always unpleasant. For a person accustomed to it, sleeping alone in a silent room might have felt strange, perhaps even frightening. A room filled with familiar breathing was reassuring. Someone was always nearby. If a child woke during the night, a parent could hear. If a strange sound came from outside, several people would notice. The crowded room offered a kind of security. The individual gave up privacy, but gained companionship, and this brings us back to one of the most powerful forces shaping historical sleep. Temperature, because the crowded bedroom was not only about family or architecture, it was also about warmth. In a world where winter could enter through every crack and poorly insulated walls offered little protection, sleeping close together could make an enormous difference. The human body became part of the heating system, and the colder the night became, the more valuable that shared warmth could feel. Soon, our journey will leave the ordinary rooms of medieval homes and move toward the harshest seasons of the year, when frost covered the windows, when fires struggled to survive until morning, and when the design of a sleeping space could mean the difference between waking comfortably and waking to a world that felt frozen solid. The great hall has fallen silent. The tables are empty now. The benches stand quietly against the walls, and the last embers in the hearth glow like tiny red stars beneath a blanket of ash. Outside, the temperature continues to fall. The darkness feels colder than it did only a few hours ago, and slowly, the people inside the house begin to understand what winter truly means, because for much of human history, sleep was not simply a matter of closing your eyes, it was a battle against temperature. Modern homes have changed the experience of winter almost beyond recognition. We turn a dial, we switch on a heater, we close a well-sealed window, and the cold remains outside, separated from us by walls designed to keep it away. But earlier homes were not nearly so forgiving. Stone could become icy, wood could allow drafts to slip through, windows might be covered with shutters, cloth, or thin materials that offered little protection. The fire was often the heart of the home, but it could not warm every corner. Near the hearth, the air might be comfortable. A few steps away, the temperature could feel completely different. And when the fire weakened during the night, the entire house slowly cooled. This changed the way people slept. The bed became more than a place to rest, it became a shelter. Every part of it was designed, intentionally or accidentally, to preserve warmth. Mattresses were filled with materials that trapped air, blankets were layered, curtains were drawn, wooden enclosures were built, and people slept close together. The cold encouraged creativity. A simple blanket was useful, several blankets were better. A heavy cover could hold warmth close to the body, a thick mattress could separate the sleeper from a frozen floor, and a bed raised above the ground could provide another small barrier against the cold. But one of the most effective solutions was remarkably simple. Stay close to another human being. In a crowded household, people naturally gather together. Children slept beside parents, couples shared beds, servants might sleep in rooms near one another, and in some homes, several people occupied the same sleeping platform. It was not necessarily romantic, it was practical. The human body produces heat, and when several bodies share a confined space, that warmth becomes easier to retain. The enclosed bed therefore became particularly valuable. In cold regions, its wooden walls reduced the amount of air that needed to be warmed. Curtains could prevent warm air from escaping too quickly, and the sleeping person could disappear beneath layers of fabric until only the face remained exposed. Imagine entering such a bed on a freezing night. The mattress is cold at first, the blankets feel heavy, your breath is visible in the air. For a few minutes, the body struggles to become comfortable, then the warmth begins to build, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The blankets trap the heat, the mattress becomes less cold, the small space around you feels warmer. Outside, winter continues, but inside the bed, a tiny climate has been created. This was one of the great advantages of enclosed sleeping spaces. They allowed people to heat the person, instead of heating the entire room. That difference was enormous. Fuel was expensive, wood had to be collected, coal, where available, required labor and money. A fire that burned too strongly through the night could consume valuable resources, so people learned to conserve heat wherever possible. The design of the home reflected this reality. Rooms were often smaller, beds were positioned carefully, curtains became practical tools, and the warmest spaces were often considered the most desirable. Winter also changed the rhythm of sleep. Long nights meant more hours spent indoors. People went to bed earlier in some seasons. They woke later when daylight arrived slowly. The darkness itself became part of everyday life, and while the cold could be uncomfortable, it also created a strange intimacy. Families gathered closer around the fire. People shared stories. Clothing was layered. Blankets were precious. The entire household became more aware of the simple importance of warmth. But not every region faced winter in the same way. In the far north, where the cold was more severe, sleeping arrangements developed their own distinctive forms. People built homes designed to protect against powerful winds. They used thick materials. They reduced openings. They created compact interiors where heat could be preserved. And among the peoples of the northern world, the Vikings developed their own relationship with darkness, cold, and sleep. Their sleeping spaces were shaped by long winters, by smoky fires, by timber halls, and by a landscape where the night could stretch for hours. As we travel northward now, leaving the crowded medieval room behind, the air grows colder. The wind moves across dark forests and frozen shores, and somewhere in the distance, beyond the glow of a longhouse fire, another sleeping world is waiting, a world of timber walls, woven blankets, raised platforms, and the quiet breathing of people resting together beneath the northern sky. The winter wind moves across the northern landscape. It passes over dark forests, frozen fields, and distant shores, carrying the sharp scent of snow and salt. Inside a long wooden hall, however, the world feels different. The wind is still there, you can hear it pressing against the walls, but inside, there is warmth. A fire burns low in the center of the room, its light moving gently across timber beams darkened by years of smoke. Around the edges of the hall, people are beginning to settle down. This is the world of the Vikings, a world often imagined through ships, voyages, and battles. But tonight, there is none of that. There is only the quiet reality of ordinary life. People who have spent the day working, eating, traveling, and enduring the cold, now need somewhere to sleep, and the sleeping spaces of Viking communities reveal something important. they were shaped by the environment. A northern winter demanded practical solutions. The longhouse itself was one of them. These large timber buildings could serve as homes, gathering places, and centers of daily life, rather than dividing life into many separate rooms. People often lived together beneath one roof. The main hall could be surprisingly long. A central fire provided heat and light. Smoke slowly rose toward openings in the roof, and along the walls, raised platforms offered places to sit during the day and sleep at night. These raised benches were practical. They lifted the body away from the cold earth. They provided a stable surface for bedding, and they allowed the same part of the building to serve multiple purposes. During the day, people could sit there. At night, they could lie down, a simple arrangement, but one that made sense. Imagine walking through the longhouse after midnight. The fire has become quieter, the voices have disappeared, the great room is now filled with sleeping bodies. Some people lie beneath wool blankets, others are wrapped in heavy clothing. The raised platforms are crowded. There is little personal space, but there is warmth. The sleepers are surrounded by familiar people. The walls protect them from the wind, and the fire, even when reduced to glowing embers, still gives off enough heat to make the darkness bearable. The Vikings' sleeping environment was not luxurious, but it was carefully adapted to its world. Wool was especially valuable. It could be woven into thick blankets and clothing that retained warmth even in damp conditions. Furs could provide additional insulation. Animal skins might be placed beneath the body or used as coverings. Every material had a purpose. Nothing was wasted easily. The bed itself was often less important than the layers placed upon it. A wooden platform alone would have been hard and cold, but add straw, then woven fabric, then wool, then fur, and the experience changed completely. The body became separated from the frozen world outside. The same principle appeared in other northern sleeping traditions. The ground was cold, so people raised themselves above it. The air was cold, so they enclosed themselves in thick materials. The night was long, so they gathered together. There was also an interesting social dimension to these sleeping arrangements. The longhouse was a shared environment. People lived close together. Privacy was limited, but this closeness could also provide security. If someone woke during the night, they were not alone. A person could hear the breathing of others, the movement of the fire, the wind against the roof, the occasional sound of an animal outside. The longhouse never became completely silent. It breathed with the people inside it, and perhaps this made the darkness feel less frightening. For the Vikings, the world outside could be unpredictable. The sea was dangerous. The weather could change quickly. Winter could isolate communities. But inside the longhouse, there was a sense of belonging. The sleeping space was part of the larger community. This does not mean everyone slept in exactly the same way. Wealthier households could afford better bedding. Important individuals might have more comfortable spaces. Different regions had different traditions, and archaeological evidence suggests that sleeping arrangements varied over time and place, but the basic principle remained. The environment shaped the bed shaped the home, and the home shaped the way people experienced the night. There is something strangely peaceful about imagining the longhouse after everyone has fallen asleep. The fire is nearly gone. The wooden walls creak softly. A blanket shifts. Someone turns in there. Sleep. Outside, snow gathers silently on the roof, and beneath it all, the longhouse remains warm enough to shelter the sleeping community. Yet the Vikings were not the only people who understood the value of creating a boundary around the bed. Across Europe, another invention would soon appear in many sleeping spaces, a simple piece of fabric. At first, it might seem decorative, something elegant, something meant to make a bed look beautiful. But when night came, those curtains served a purpose far more practical than appearance. They could hold in warmth, keep out drafts, reduce light, and create a private world. Around the sleeper, the bed was becoming more than a place to lie down. It was becoming a room within a room, and the quiet curtains surrounding it would soon become one of the most familiar symbols of historical sleep. The longhouse has grown still. Beyond its thick wooden walls, snow continues to fall silently. Inside, the fire has become a faint red glow, and the sleeping figures along the walls are wrapped tightly against the northern cold. But now, imagine moving south, across forests and valleys, into a quieter room where the bed is no longer completely open to the space around it. Instead, something hangs between the sleeper and the rest of the world: fabric. Heavy curtains. At first glance, they might appear decorative, perhaps embroidered with flowers, perhaps made from plain wool, perhaps dyed in deep, muted colors, but bed curtains were much more than decoration. They created a small room within a room. And for people living in cold houses, this could make an extraordinary difference. Imagine climbing into bed on a winter evening. The room is cold. The walls have absorbed the chill of the night. A small fire burns somewhere nearby, but its warmth does not reach every corner. Then the curtains close. Suddenly, the world becomes smaller. The cold air outside the bed is separated from the space around your body. Your breath warms the air. The blankets hold the heat. And the fabric creates another barrier between you and the darkness. It is a simple idea, but an effective one. Bed curtains helped preserve warmth, they reduced drafts, and they made a large room feel smaller and more intimate. In a time when heating an entire home could require enormous amounts of fuel, this mattered. Why warm every corner of a room when you could create a warm little space around the bed? The curtains became a kind of portable architecture. They did not require bricks. They did not require new walls. They simply hung from a wooden frame above the bed, and when they were drawn closed, they transformed the sleeping space. The sleeper disappeared. The room remained outside. This also created something else: privacy. The importance of privacy has changed dramatically throughout history. For ordinary people, private space was often limited. Families shared rooms. Servants slept nearby. Guests might occupy the same chamber. Even wealthy households could have several people moving through the same sleeping areas. The curtains offered a solution. They created a boundary without requiring another room. A person could lie behind the fabric and feel, for a few hours, separated from everyone else. The sounds of the household continued beyond the curtains. Someone might whisper, a floorboard might creak, a servant might walk through the room. But inside the enclosed bed, the sleeper was hidden from view. The curtain became a quiet border between public and private life, and this was especially important for couples. A married couple might share a bed, but their bed could still be positioned in a room used by others. Curtains offered them a small degree of intimacy. They could close the fabric and create a private world, not a separate room, but something close. The design of these beds varied greatly. Some had simple wooden frames, others were elaborate structures with carved posts. The curtains could be made from heavy wool, linen, or other fabrics. Wealthier families could afford finer materials. Some beds became elaborate symbols of status. The fabric itself could communicate wealth. A richly decorated bed suggested that the owner had money to spend on materials that were not strictly necessary for survival. Yet even the simplest curtain had practical value. It blocked light. This mattered in a world where candles and lamps were precious. If one person needed to stay awake while another wanted to sleep, a curtain could create darkness. It also helped reduce visual distractions. The sleeper could close the curtains and no longer see the room around them. The bed became a place where the outside world seemed to disappear. there was also something psychological about the enclosed space. Human beings often feel safer when surrounded by boundaries. A completely open sleeping area can feel vulnerable, but when curtains surround the body, the mind receives a different message. You are inside, you are protected, you are hidden. The fabric itself is thin, but the feeling it creates can be surprisingly powerful. And perhaps this is why bed curtains survived for so long. They were practical, but they also changed the emotional experience of sleep. They turned the bed into a small sanctuary, a place where the sleeper could retreat from the rest of the household. Yet even with curtains drawn, many people still did not sleep alone. Behind those fabric walls, several bodies might be sharing the same mattress: parents, children, relatives, travelers. Sometimes strangers. The bed could be warm and private, but it could also be remarkably crowded. And this brings us to one of the most surprising realities of historical sleep. For much of the past, sharing a bed with another person was not unusual at all. In fact, for many families, it was simply the normal way the night was spent. The curtains might close, the candle might disappear, and beneath the heavy blankets, an entire family might settle together, waiting quietly for morning. The curtains are closed now. Behind their heavy folds, the room has become a world of its own. The candlelight is hidden, the voices outside have faded, and beneath the blankets, several people lie close together, sharing the same narrow space. To modern eyes, the scene might seem unusual, perhaps even uncomfortable, but for much of human history, sleeping together was not considered strange. It was simply ordinary life. The idea that every person should have a private bed, or even a private bedroom, is surprisingly recent. For earlier families, the bed was often one of the most valuable pieces of furniture in the home. It was expensive to build, difficult to move, and, in cold climates, extremely useful. So when night arrived, people gathered around it. A mother might sleep beside her children. A father might lie on the other side, a baby could rest between them. Sometimes siblings shared the same mattress, and in very crowded homes, several generations might sleep within the same room. The arrangement was practical, but it was also deeply connected to family life. Imagine a small household settling down for the night. The day has finally ended. The fire is low, the children are tired. A mother lifts a blanket and calls them closer. One child climbs into bed, then another. The mattress shifts beneath their combined weight. The blankets are pulled upward. Someone complains that their feet are cold. Another child moves closer to the warmth. Soon, everyone becomes still. The room is quiet except for breathing. The shared bed is not luxurious. There may be little space to move, but it is warm. And in the darkness, no one is alone. For parents, having children close by also had practical advantages. Babies could be watched more easily. A child who became ill during the night could be noticed. If someone woke frightened by a strange sound, another person was only inches away. The shared bed was therefore more than furniture. It was part of the household's system of care. But there was another reason families stayed together: cold. A single person could lose body heat quickly. Several people under the same blankets could create a warmer environment. In poorly heated homes, this simple fact mattered. The bed became a small reservoir of warmth, and the more people gathered beneath the blankets, the easier it was to preserve that warmth. This helps explain why historical beds could sometimes be surprisingly wide. A bed designed for one person was not always the standard. The sleeping space had to accommodate families, and in some cases, visitors, travelers, or household members who had nowhere else to go. This was particularly common in inns and other places where beds were shared by strangers. The idea might feel uncomfortable today, but historical attitudes toward personal space were different. Privacy was not necessarily expected. A person's body was often part of the shared environment. People worked together, ate together, traveled together, and slept together. The separation between individual and community was not as sharp as it is now, yet sleeping together did not always mean that everyone was treated equally. Social position mattered. In wealthy households, the head of the family might have a large bed. The bed itself could be a symbol of authority. Important guests could be given better sleeping arrangements. Servants might sleep elsewhere, and children could be moved into separate spaces as they grew older. So the shared bed was not simply a universal tradition. It existed alongside a complicated hierarchy. For some, sharing a bed meant family closeness. For others, it meant necessity. And for the poorest households, it could mean there was simply nowhere else to sleep. The same object could therefore represent comfort to one person and hardship to another. This difference becomes especially clear when we compare households across social classes. Imagine two homes on the same winter night. In one, a wealthy family sleeps behind heavy curtains in a large bed covered with fine fabrics. The mattress is thick, the blankets are warm, the room is protected from drafts. In another home, a family sleeps together on a simple straw-filled mattress. The blankets are worn, the room is smaller. The fire is weaker. Both families share a bed, but their experiences are worlds apart. The bed itself cannot tell us the whole story. We must look at the materials, the room, the clothing, the heating, the food available during the day. All these details shape the quality of sleep, and perhaps that is one of the most important lessons hidden inside the history of shared beds. Comfort was never distributed equally. The wealthy could purchase warmth, the poor had to create it together. One family might rely on thick curtains and expensive textiles, another relied on closeness. One could afford a private chamber, another could only afford a corner of a crowded room. Yet when the night became cold and dark, the human need remained the same. Everyone wanted to feel safe, everyone wanted warmth, everyone wanted to wake in the morning, and so, beneath the blankets, families stayed close, waiting for the first pale light of dawn. But the differences between their sleeping worlds would become even more visible when we step away from the ordinary family home and enter the grand houses of the wealthy. Their beds could become astonishing displays of wealth, while, only a short distance away, the poor might sleep with almost nothing beneath them. The night, it seems, was never equally comfortable for everyone. The family has finally fallen asleep beneath one heavy blanket. Several bodies lie close together, sharing the warmth that the small fire can no longer provide. Outside, the winter darkness stretches across the countryside, but not every home experiences the night in quite the same way. Only a few miles away, perhaps, another household is preparing for sleep. The difference is not in the darkness. The night belongs equally to everyone. The difference is what waits behind the walls. For the wealthy, sleep could be surrounded by comfort. For the poor, it was often something that had to be carefully managed. The contrast could be enormous. Imagine entering a wealthy household at night. The rooms are larger, the walls are thicker, the windows are better protected. A grand bed stands beneath a wooden canopy, perhaps surrounded by heavy curtains. The mattress is thick, the bedding is layered, the fabrics are soft, the bed itself may be beautifully carved and decorated. Everything about it suggests that sleep is important, and yet, the luxury does not end with the bed. There may be servants to prepare the room. Someone might arrange the blankets. Another person could tend the fire. Candles provide gentle light. Warm clothing waits nearby. The entire sleeping environment is designed to reduce discomfort. Now imagine stepping into the home of a poor family. The difference is immediate. The room is smaller, the walls may allow drafts, the floor is hard, the mattress might be little more than a sack filled with straw, the blanket is valuable because there may not be another, the fire must be carefully controlled, too much fuel is wasteful, too little warmth makes the night miserable, the family sleeps close together because there is no reason not to. Every bit of warmth matters, yet it would be too simple to say that wealthy people slept comfortably while poor people suffered. The reality was more complicated. Wealth could buy better materials, but even the richest household could not completely escape the limitations of its time. There was no modern central heating, no electric blanket, no climate control. Even a luxurious bedroom could become cold. The difference was that wealthy people had more ways to respond. They could afford thicker curtains, more blankets, better mattresses, more fuel, larger fires, and perhaps most importantly, more space. Privacy itself was a luxury. A wealthy person might have a private chamber. A poor family might sleep in the same room where they cooked and worked. One person could close a door, another could only pull a blanket over their head. This difference shaped the emotional experience of nighttime. For the wealthy, darkness could become peaceful. The room was controlled, the doors were closed, the bed was protected. For the poor, the night could remain more exposed. Sounds from outside were easier to hear, cold air could enter, animals might be nearby, and if someone became sick, the entire household knew. Still, there was one thing that united both worlds: the desire for warmth. Even the grandest bed could not create heat by itself, and even the poorest family could find comfort in the simple act of sleeping close together. The wealthy might purchase comfort, the poor often created it through cooperation. This is why the history of sleep cannot be separated from the history of material life. The quality of a person's bed depended on what they could afford. The quality of their mattress depended on available materials. The warmth of their room depended on fuel, and the amount of privacy they enjoyed depended on the size of their home. A bed was never simply a bed. It was a reflection of society. You could look at someone's sleeping space and learn something about their position in the world. A richly carved bed suggested wealth, a thick mattress suggested resources, heavy curtains suggested privacy, a simple straw-filled sack suggested necessity, and yet, sometimes the most interesting stories are found in the spaces between these extremes. A servant working in a wealthy household might sleep near the family. A traveler might be given a place beside strangers. A poor person might inherit an old mattress from someone richer. Furniture moved, beds were repaired, blankets were passed from one generation to another. Objects carried traces of the lives that came before. And so, the sleeping world was constantly changing, but beneath all these differences was another layer of history, the beliefs people carried into the darkness, because nighttime was not only cold and uncomfortable, it was also mysterious. Before modern science explained the brain, dreams, and sleep, the darkness created countless questions. What happened to the soul when the body slept? Could dreams predict the future? Could spirits enter the room? Was there a safe direction in which to place the head? Could certain objects protect a sleeper? The answers varied from place to place, but everywhere, people tried to make sense of the mysterious hours between sunset and sunrise. And as the wealthy settled beneath their curtains and the poor gathered beneath their worn blankets, both carried their own beliefs into sleep, beliefs that could make the darkness feel comforting or strangely dangerous, because long after the fires went out, the night itself still held secrets that no one could fully explain. The house is quiet now. Behind one set of wooden doors, a family sleeps beneath a heavy blanket. In another room, someone rests inside a narrow box bed, surrounded by timber walls, and somewhere else, perhaps in a wealthy home, a tired person has fallen asleep in a high-backed chair. their body still partially upright. The sleeping arrangements may be different, but the darkness surrounding them is the same, and in earlier centuries, darkness carried a strange power. When the sun disappeared, people could no longer see the world clearly. The familiar landscape vanished, the forest became a black shape, the road disappeared into shadow. Even the room where you lived your entire life could suddenly feel unfamiliar. Without electric lights, people depended on small flames, a candle, an oil lamp, a glowing hearth. But these lights were weak. They illuminated only a small circle. Beyond that circle, there was darkness, and darkness encouraged imagination. For ancient and medieval people, sleep was not always considered a completely natural and harmless state. It was mysterious. The body became still, the eyes closed, the mind wandered into dreams. And when the sleeper finally woke, hours had somehow disappeared. What happened during that time? Different cultures developed different explanations. Some believed that dreams were messages. Others thought dreams might reveal future events. Some saw them as warnings, and some believed that the soul could travel beyond the body while a person slept. These ideas made nighttime feel different from daytime. The sleeping person was vulnerable. They could not easily defend themselves. They could not see what was happening around them. So people developed ways to protect themselves. Some traditions involved prayers, others used objects believed to have protective powers. A small charm might be placed near the bed, an object could be hung above the sleeping space. Certain symbols were believed to keep away misfortune. The exact beliefs varied from region to region, but the desire was universal, to feel safe. This may also help explain why enclosed beds became so appealing. A wooden box could feel like more than furniture. It could create a physical boundary around the sleeper. The walls separated the person from the rest of the room. The doors could be closed, curtains could be drawn. The darkness outside became something distant. For someone who believed that the night contained unseen dangers, this enclosure could offer psychological comfort. The sleeper was hidden, protected, contained, and perhaps, in the imagination, harder for anything mysterious to reach. There were also superstitions connected to the position of the bed. In different traditions, people paid attention to the direction in which they slept. The placement of the head could be considered important. Some believed certain directions were healthier, others connected particular orientations with religious or spiritual beliefs. A bed was therefore not always placed wherever there happened to be space. Its position could carry meaning. Even the act of entering bed could become surrounded by custom. People might avoid certain behaviors after dark. They might be careful about what they said. They might pay attention to dreams, and when a person woke suddenly in the middle of the night, they might wonder whether the experience meant something. Imagine waking inside a dark wooden box bed. For a moment, you do not know where you are. The room is silent. The fire has gone out. The wooden walls surround you. You hear a faint sound somewhere beyond the door. Perhaps it is only the wind. Perhaps a branch brushing against the wall. Perhaps someone moving in another room. But in the darkness, the mind begins to wonder, was it only a sound, or was it something more? This uncertainty was powerful. And people living without modern explanations for many natural phenomena often had to interpret the world through stories and beliefs. A strange noise could become a warning, a dream could become a prophecy, a sudden illness could be blamed on unseen forces. The night was a place where ordinary explanations were not always available, yet these beliefs were not necessarily terrifying. Many nighttime traditions were comforting. A prayer before sleep could calm the mind. A protective symbol could provide reassurance. A familiar ritual could signal that the day was finally over. These practices helped people transition from wakefulness into rest. In that sense, Ancient superstitions served a purpose that modern bedtime routines sometimes serve. Today, they created a feeling of order. The world might be uncertain, but the person knew what to do before sleeping. The candle was extinguished, the door was closed, the prayer was spoken. The blanket was pulled up, and then, the eyes closed. Perhaps the greatest mystery of all was simply the mystery of sleep itself. No one could fully explain why consciousness disappeared each night. No one could see where dreams came from, and no one could know exactly what the mind experienced in those quiet hours. So people created stories. They filled the darkness with meaning, and sometimes, those stories influenced the very beds they slept in, but beliefs were only part of the story. Because even without superstition, there was another practical problem waiting beneath every sleeper: the bed itself. What if there was no soft mattress? What if there were no thick blankets? What if the person had only a wooden platform? Or a pile of straw, or, sometimes, nothing more than a hard surface beneath their body? Before comfortable mattresses became common, the experience of sleep could be surprisingly rough, and the history of the bed was about to become much less comfortable than the curtains and blankets might suggest. The candle has almost disappeared. Its tiny flame flickers once, then steadies. Inside the wooden box bed, someone shifts beneath a rough blanket, but beneath that blanket is something we might find surprisingly unfamiliar. There is no thick mattress, no soft foam, no carefully engineered layer designed to support every curve of the body. The sleeper is resting on something much simpler, perhaps a wooden platform, perhaps a sack, perhaps a thin layer of straw. For much of human history, the idea of a truly comfortable mattress was a luxury. The beds of ordinary people were often practical rather than soft, and sometimes they were barely beds at all. Imagine lying down at the end of a long day. Your body is tired, your shoulders ache from work, your hands are rough, your feet are sore. You enter the sleeping space and discover a simple surface waiting for you. It might be made from wooden boards, hard, unforgiving, cold. To make it more comfortable, someone has spread a layer of straw across the top. The straw is held inside a large cloth sack. It is not perfectly even. Some areas are thicker than others. The surface shifts when you move. But compared with bare wood, it is an improvement. This was one of the most common ways ordinary people created something resembling a mattress. Straw was widely available. It could be gathered after harvest. It could be dried. It could be placed inside fabric or woven coverings, and when it became dirty or compressed, it could be replaced. The simplicity of the material was part of its advantage, but a straw mattress had its own problems. It could become flattened, moisture could collect inside, the material could become dusty, and over time, it might need to be opened, cleaned, and refilled. Yet despite these inconveniences, straw bedding was valuable. It created a layer between the human body and the hard surface beneath. It also trapped air, and trapped air could provide insulation. This mattered enormously in cold climates. The floor might be freezing, a wooden platform might absorb the chill, but a thick layer of dry straw could create a small barrier between the sleeper and the cold. So the mattress was not only about comfort, it was also about survival. The materials used inside beds varied according to location and wealth. Straw was common. Other plant materials could be used. In some places, dried grasses or reeds provided bedding. Wealthier households could afford better fillings. Feathers were prized because they were light and soft, but collecting enough feathers to fill a large mattress required resources. The difference between a straw bed and a feather bed could be enormous. One was functional, the other could feel almost luxurious. Imagine sinking into a feather-filled mattress after spending years sleeping on straw. The body would immediately notice the difference. the surface would respond gently, the weight of the body would be supported, the sleeper could move without feeling every hard board beneath them, but such comfort was not available to everyone. For many people, the bed remained a compromise. It was good enough, not perfect, not soft by modern standards, but sufficient to allow the body to rest, and there were people who had even less. Travelers might sleep on benches. Workers could rest on floors, soldiers might sleep on rough bedding, the poorest individuals could use whatever materials they could find, a pile of straw, an old blanket, a sack, perhaps a coat folded beneath the head. Sleep did not require luxury. The human body could adapt, but adaptation did not mean the experience was pleasant. The hardness of the surface could affect the body, the cold could make muscles tense, and insects could become a constant problem. A mattress made from natural materials could provide shelter for unwanted visitors. Keeping bedding clean was difficult. Washing large amounts of fabric required time and water, so people developed other methods. Mattresses could be shaken, bedding could be aired, straw could be replaced, sunlight could help dry damp materials. These ordinary tasks rarely appear in grand historical stories, yet they shaped everyday life. The bed had to be maintained, otherwise the place meant for rest could become uncomfortable. And this brings us to another curious detail. The mattress itself could reveal something about a person's social position. The poor might sleep on straw, the middle classes could afford better materials, the wealthy could enjoy thick feather beds, and in the most luxurious homes, mattresses could become surprisingly elaborate. But no matter how soft the surface became, one object remained important: the pillow. Today, a pillow seems almost inseparable from the idea of a bed, yet historically, pillows were not always soft, they were not always common, and they were certainly not always affordable. Some people rested their heads on folded cloth. Others used wooden supports, some had no pillow at all. The simple act of placing your head somewhere comfortable was, like so many other parts of sleep, shaped by wealth and circumstance, and as the night deepens, our journey moves upward, from the hard surface beneath the body, to the small support beneath the head, a place where comfort could be surprisingly rare, and where the pillow itself could become a symbol of luxury. The straw beneath the sleeper has settled, the night has grown deeper, and the room is almost completely still. But as we look closer at the sleeping figure, another detail becomes difficult to ignore. The head is resting on something surprisingly simple. There is no thick, soft pillow rising beneath the neck, no carefully shaped cushion. Perhaps there is only a folded piece of cloth, perhaps a rolled-up blanket, or perhaps nothing at all. Today, a pillow seems like one of the most ordinary objects in the world. We barely notice it. We place one beneath our head without thinking. Some people prefer a single pillow, others surround themselves with several, but throughout much of history, pillows were not always soft, common, or affordable. The first sleeping supports were often very different from the fluffy cushions we know today. In some ancient cultures, people used hard objects to raise the head, wood, stone, or specially shaped supports. The purpose was not always comfort in the modern sense. Sometimes the head was elevated for practical or cultural reasons. A raised position could keep the face away from the cold surface below. It could also help maintain a particular sleeping posture, but these early headrests were often hard, very hard. Imagine resting your head after a long day on a carefully carved wooden support. It might be beautifully made. It might even belong to a wealthy household, but it would not feel like sinking into a modern pillow. The human body had to adapt, and for ordinary people, the solution was often much simpler. A folded cloth could provide a little height, a rolled blanket could support the neck, a spare piece of clothing could become a temporary cushion. In a crowded home, there was no reason for every person to own a dedicated pillow. Materials had to be used carefully, clothing was valuable. Blankets were valuable, fabric required time and labor to produce. So a separate object designed only for the head could be considered unnecessary, especially if the family already owned very little. This helps explain why pillows could become symbols of wealth. A person who owned a soft, well-filled pillow was enjoying something that many others simply could not afford. The materials inside mattered, feathers were light, they were soft, and they could create a comfortable cushion. But collecting enough feathers required time, the covering also required fabric, and the entire object needed to be sewn carefully so that the filling would not escape. The wealthy household could afford such luxuries. An ordinary family might use straw, or wool, or cloth. The difference could be felt immediately. A feather pillow gently gave way beneath the head, a straw-filled cushion was firmer, a rolled blanket could be uneven, a wooden headrest offered almost no softness at all, and yet, people slept. The human body is remarkably adaptable. It learns to rest on whatever surface is available. Perhaps this is one reason historical descriptions of sleep often sound strange to modern ears. We imagine that everyone must have wanted the softest possible bed, but comfort is relative. If you have spent your entire life sleeping on straw, a straw mattress may feel perfectly normal. If you have never experienced a feather pillow, you cannot miss it. The idea of luxury depends on what you know. Still, the desire for comfort was always present. People experimented, they adjusted their bedding, they folded fabric, they added layers, they changed the height beneath the head. Small improvements could make a long night easier. The pillow therefore became part of a larger story. The human body was constantly searching for better ways to rest. A harder surface could be softened, a cold room could be warmed. An open bed could be enclosed, a shared sleeping space could be separated by curtains. And slowly, over generations, these small improvements accumulated, yet there was still a problem. The cold, even with a pillow beneath the head, a thick mattress beneath the body, and blankets pulled over the shoulders, winter could make sleep difficult. The room might become freezing before morning, the fire might disappear completely, and the sleeper could wake in the darkest hour, feeling the cold pressing through every layer. This was when the architecture of sleep became especially important. A bed could be placed away from windows, curtains could be drawn tightly, wooden walls could surround the sleeper, families could gather together, and in the harshest climates, people developed even more ingenious ways to survive the night. The cold did not simply change what people wore, it changed where they slept, how they slept, and sometimes who they slept beside. As we move deeper into the winter night, the world outside becomes colder, frost covers the ground, the wind moves across empty fields, and inside the homes of earlier generations, people retreat into the smallest, warmest spaces they can find. Some climb into enclosed wooden beds, some pull curtains around themselves, some curl together beneath heavy blankets, and some, unable to afford anything better, simply endure the cold until morning. The winter night is still long. And the next part of our journey will take us into those darkest hours, when staying warm was not merely a matter of comfort, but a quiet struggle against the cold itself. The candle has burned lower now. Outside, winter has taken complete control of the landscape. The fields are silent beneath frost, the trees stand bare and dark against the sky, and the wind moves slowly through the empty streets, slipping beneath doors and finding every crack in the walls. Inside, people prepare for the longest part of the night, the hours before dawn. These were often the coldest. After sunset, a fire could still be burning brightly. But as the night continued, Fuel became scarce, the flames weakened, the embers turned red, and eventually, the warmth of the hearth could no longer reach every corner of the home, for people living in earlier centuries. Winter sleep could be dangerous, not because every night was a struggle for survival, but because extreme cold could become deadly. The human body loses heat continuously, and during sleep, a person cannot easily respond to changing conditions. If the blankets moved aside, if the fire went out, if the temperature dropped suddenly, the sleeper might not wake quickly enough to react. This was especially difficult for people living in poorly insulated homes. Walls might be made from timber, mud, or stone. Windows could be small, doors might have gaps, the floor could remain cold throughout the night, and the roof offered only limited protection from the weather. So people became experts at preserving warmth. The bed was one of their most important tools. An enclosed wooden bed could create a protected pocket of warmer air. Heavy curtains could reduce drafts, thick blankets could trap body heat, and straw mattresses could separate the sleeper from cold wooden boards. Every layer mattered. Imagine climbing into such a bed on a freezing night. The mattress is cold, the blanket feels heavy. Your hands disappear beneath the fabric, you pull the curtains closed. The world outside seems to disappear. For a while, you can still hear the wind. Then the sounds become distant, your breathing slows, the warmth begins to build, and eventually, sleep arrives. But the night continues without you. The fire gradually fades, the temperature falls, and somewhere in the darkness, the house settles. Wood contracts, roof beams creak, a shutter moves in the wind. The sleeper turns beneath the blankets. Perhaps they wake briefly, they pull the covers closer, then they disappear into sleep again. This repeated movement was part of winter life. People did not necessarily expect to remain perfectly comfortable throughout the night. Sleep could be interrupted by cold. The blankets had to be adjusted. The fire might need attention. Someone might wake to add another piece of wood. In some households, the responsibility for maintaining warmth was shared. A person might rise during the night to tend the fire, then return to bed. The task was unpleasant, but necessary, and the importance of fuel cannot be overstated. A fire required wood required labor. Trees had to be cut, branches collected, logs carried. In some regions, fuel was scarce. The amount burned during the night had to be carefully considered. Too much firewood could be wasted, too little could leave the household freezing. This meant that warmth was connected to resources. A wealthy household could burn more fuel. A poor family might rely heavily on body heat and blankets. The difference could become especially serious during long winters. Food also played a role. A person who had eaten enough had more energy available to maintain body temperature. Someone who was hungry or weak could be more vulnerable to the cold, so winter survival was never only about the bed. It was about the entire household: food, fuel, clothing, shelter, bedding. All of these elements worked together, and when one failed, the others became more important. This is one reason why families often slept close together. The shared bed was not simply a cultural habit, it was a practical response to the environment. Several people beneath the same blankets could conserve heat more effectively than individuals sleeping separately. Children could be kept close, the elderly might be placed in warmer positions, and the most vulnerable members of the household could benefit from the warmth of others. The enclosed bed therefore became a kind of survival technology. It may look strange to us now: a wooden box with doors, a curtain surrounding a mattress, a narrow sleeping chamber hidden inside a larger room. But in the depths of winter, it made perfect sense. The goal was simple: create a small space, keep the warmth inside, keep the cold outside, and make it safely through the night. Yet winter also changed the psychology of sleep. the cold made the bed more desirable, leaving it became difficult. The moment you pushed aside the blankets, the warmth disappeared, the floor was freezing, the room was dark, and morning seemed impossibly far away, so people stayed in bed longer when they could. The bed became a refuge, a place where the outside world could be forgotten. Perhaps this is why some historical sleeping spaces feel almost dreamlike to us today: a wooden box, heavy curtains, thick blankets, a dying fire, the sleeper hidden from the cold. There is something comforting about the image, but beneath that comfort lies a harsher reality. For many people, surviving winter depended on small decisions made every day: enough food, enough fuel, dry bedding, a secure roof, and a warm place to sleep. As dawn finally approaches, the darkness begins to soften, the wind is quieter, the fire is almost gone, and beneath the blankets, someone opens their eyes. Another winter night has passed. The cold did not win, but the experience left its mark, and across Europe, people developed countless ways to make the darkness more bearable. Some were practical, some were unusual, and some were deeply connected to tradition, because when night finally arrived, people did not simply climb into bed and sleep, they followed habits passed down through generations. Small actions performed before the eyes closed, rituals that prepared the body and mind for the mysterious hours ahead. And as our journey continues, we will step quietly into those forgotten bedtime routines, where the final moments before sleep could be just as fascinating as the dreams that followed. The coldest hour has finally passed. Outside, the darkness is beginning to soften, but inside the old house, morning has not yet arrived. The fire is still glowing faintly, the blankets remain pulled tightly around sleeping bodies, and somewhere in the quiet room, a person slowly wakes, not because the sun has risen, but because the night is changing. For people in earlier centuries, the journey into sleep was rarely as simple as turning off a light and climbing beneath the covers. There were habits, customs, small preparations. Some were practical, others were connected to religion, superstition, or family tradition, and many of them might seem strange to us today. Imagine a household preparing for bed hundreds of years ago. The day's work is finally finished. The last meal has been eaten. The fire is being reduced. One by one, people begin to prepare themselves for the night. Clothing is loosened, hair is covered, the sleeping space is arranged, blankets are shaken, straw mattresses are adjusted, and if the family is fortunate enough to have curtains, they are pulled around the bed. Everything is done slowly, almost automatically, because these actions have been repeated many times before. One of the most familiar nighttime habits was prayer. For many Europeans, especially in deeply religious communities, prayer was part of the transition between waking and sleeping. A person might kneel beside the bed, or sit quietly inside the sleeping space. Words might be spoken softly, sometimes alone, sometimes with the family. The prayer created a moment of stillness. The day had ended, the night had begun, and the person could finally let go of the worries of daily life. For others, the bedtime routine involved protective objects. A charm might be placed near the sleeping area. A religious symbol could hang above the bed. A small object might be kept beneath the pillow. These things were not necessarily dramatic. They were often simple, quiet, personal, but they carried meaning. The sleeper believed that the object offered protection, and that belief itself could bring comfort. In some communities, people also paid attention to the condition of the bed before sleeping. Bedding might be shaken, the mattress might be inspected, the blankets could be aired during the day. This was partly practical. Natural bedding could attract insects, moisture could collect inside, and straw could become uncomfortable over time. So preparing the bed was an important household task. The sleeping space had to be ready before the body could truly rest. There were also customs surrounding who entered the bed first. In some households, children might be placed carefully between adults. In others, sleeping positions could reflect age or social status. The arrangement was not always random. Every person had a place, and everyone knew where it was. This was especially important in crowded homes. When several people shared one bed, movement had to be negotiated. A child might sleep at one end, a parent at the other. Someone might sleep against the wall. Another person might lie closer to the edge. The bed became a small map of the household, and once everyone was settled, the final ritual could begin. Silence. The candle was extinguished. The curtains were closed. The door was secured, and the room entered darkness. But in some places, people did not always sleep continuously through the entire night. Historical evidence suggests that segmented sleep may have been common in certain periods and communities. A person might sleep for several hours, wake during the middle of the night, remain awake for a while, then return to sleep. This quiet period could be used for prayer, conversation, reflection, or simply lying awake in the darkness. Imagine opening your eyes in the middle of the night. The room is black, everyone else is sleeping. The fire has become ash, the wooden walls are silent. You sit up inside your bed. Perhaps you pray, perhaps you listen, perhaps you simply wait. There is no clock glowing beside you, no bright screen, no artificial light telling you exactly what time it is. The night belongs to darkness, and eventually, sleep returns. These nighttime habits varied across Europe. Different regions had different traditions, different religions shaped different customs. Families passed their own practices from parents to children. Some traditions disappeared, others survived for generations. But beneath all these differences was a common purpose. People wanted to feel prepared, prepared for sleep, prepared for dreams, prepared for the unknown hours of darkness. And perhaps that is why bedtime rituals have remained so powerful throughout human history. They create a boundary. Before the ritual, you are awake. After it, you are ready to rest. The actions may be simple. Close the curtains, arrange the blankets, say a prayer, check the fire, lie down, close your eyes, but repeated night after night. These small actions become familiar. They tell the mind, the day is over, you are safe, you may rest now. And yet, beneath these rituals was a world that remained physically uncomfortable. The mattress might still be hard, the room might still be cold, the pillow might still be little more than folded cloth, the bed might still be shared with several other people. So even after the final prayer was whispered and the candle extinguished, sleep itself was not necessarily luxurious. The human body still needed somewhere to rest, and slowly, across centuries, people began to improve that place. Beds became softer, frames became stronger, mattresses became more sophisticated, sleeping spaces became more private, and eventually, the strange wooden boxes and crowded platforms of the past would begin to evolve into something much closer to the beds we recognize today. But the journey would be slow, measured not in years, but in generations. And the first changes would begin with something very simple: the desire to wake up in the morning and feel just a little less tired than the night before. The night is slowly beginning to fade. Inside the old wooden home, the final candle has gone dark, the family sleeps, the fire is little more than ash, and beneath the blankets, the bed itself tells a story that stretches across centuries, a story of small improvements, slow discoveries, and an endless human desire to sleep a little more comfortably. Because the bed we know today did not appear all at once, it evolved gradually. One generation changed something, the next generation improved it, and over hundreds of years, simple sleeping surfaces became increasingly sophisticated. At first, the goal was basic: stay off the cold ground, so people raised themselves on wooden platforms. Then came layers of plant material: straw, reeds, dried grasses. These materials created distance between the body and the hard surface beneath, but they could shift, they could flatten, and they could become uncomfortable, so people began looking for better solutions. The mattress became more important. A sack filled with straw was an improvement, but it was still rough. Then came better fillings: wool, hair, feathers. Different materials offered different experiences. Some were warm, some were soft, some were durable, and some were expensive. The more resources a household possessed, the more options it had. This is where comfort began to become a form of technology. A wealthy person could afford layers. The mattress could be thick, the bed frame could be elevated, curtains could surround the sleeping area, a canopy could protect against drafts. The entire structure could be designed to create a better environment for sleep, but even ordinary people benefited from these developments. Beds became stronger, mattresses became easier to maintain, materials became more widely available, and over time, the idea of what a bed should be began to change. The bed was no longer simply a place to survive the night, it was becoming a place designed for rest. This change can be seen in the evolution of bed frames. Early sleeping platforms were often simple: a few wooden boards, a raised structure, something sturdy enough to support the body. But eventually, craftsmen began building more elaborate frames. The four-poster bed became particularly important. Tall wooden posts rose at each corner, a canopy could stretch above, curtains could hang around the sides. The bed became almost like a small room, a private chamber within a chamber. This design had practical advantages. The curtains helped protect against drafts, the canopy could support fabric, and the enclosed space could feel warmer. But the bed also became visually impressive. It represented status. A beautifully carved bed required skilled labor. Fine fabric cost money. And a large bed required a large room, so the bed itself became a statement. It could tell visitors how wealthy the owner was. In some homes, the bed became one of the most valuable objects in the entire household. People inherited beds. They repaired them, they moved them from one home to another, they passed them between generations. A bed could remain in a family for decades, and sometimes the bed became part of important moments: births, illnesses, family gatherings, and death. The sleeping space was deeply connected to the human life cycle. Yet comfort was not only about the bed frame. The mattress continued to evolve. The simple straw mattress could be replaced more frequently. Better coverings protected the filling. Feather mattresses became increasingly desirable among those who could afford them, and bedding became more layered. A person might sleep on one mattress, with another placed above it, then blankets, then a coverlet, then curtains. The sleeping space became a carefully constructed environment. Every layer served a purpose: warmth, softness, protection, privacy, and gradually, the old wooden box began to lose some of its importance. People no longer needed to sleep completely enclosed. Rooms became better designed, heating improved, windows changed, homes became more comfortable, and as the need for extreme enclosure declined, the bed began to open outward. The wooden doors disappeared, the curtains became decorative. The sleeping chamber became a separate bedroom. The bed remained, but its relationship with the surrounding room had changed. It was no longer a shelter inside the house, it was simply part of the room. This transformation was slow. For centuries, old and new sleeping traditions existed side by side. Some people still slept on straw, others enjoyed feather beds. Some families shared one mattress, Others had separate beds. Some travelers slept upright in chairs. Others rested in elaborate private chambers. History rarely moves in a straight line. One person might be living in the future, while another lived almost exactly as their ancestors had. And yet, the direction was clear. The human desire for comfort was gradually reshaping the sleeping world. The bed was becoming softer, the bedroom quieter, the sleeping space more private, and eventually, the very architecture of the home would change. Rooms would be designed specifically for sleep, doors would close, windows would be sealed, heating would become more reliable, and the old communal sleeping spaces would slowly disappear. The transformation would take generations. But by the time it was complete, the bed would look very different from the wooden boxes and rough platforms of earlier centuries. The strange sleeping habits of the past would begin to feel distant. Almost unbelievable, yet the traces remained, in the shape of old furniture, in the design of historical houses, and in the stories passed down through families. The world was becoming more comfortable, but it was also becoming more private, and as that happened, the bedroom itself began to change. The crowded room slowly became a separate space. The shared bed became an individual bed. The open hall became a private chamber. And somewhere along that quiet journey, the modern bedroom was beginning to take shape. The old wooden box bed is beginning to disappear, not suddenly, not everywhere, but slowly, almost unnoticed. For centuries, people had slept wherever life happened to take place, in a crowded hall, beside a hearth, inside a wooden enclosure, behind heavy curtains, on a raised platform. The sleeping space was often part of the larger household, but gradually, something changed. The bedroom itself began to emerge. A room created specifically for sleep, a place where the door could be closed, a place where the bed could stand alone, and a place where a person could, perhaps for the first time, experience something that had once been rare: privacy. This transformation took a very long time. For wealthy households, private sleeping chambers appeared earlier. A large home could contain many rooms. There was space to separate activities, one room for eating, another for receiving guests, another for working, and eventually a room for sleeping. But even then, the bedroom was not necessarily completely private. Servants might enter, family members could visit, important guests might be received beside the bed. The bedroom was still part of social life, yet the idea was beginning to change. The bed was becoming the central object of the room. Instead of being hidden inside a larger living space, it stood openly within its own environment. Walls surrounded it. A door separated it from the rest of the household, and gradually, the bed became connected to the idea of personal space. This was a major change in human life. For most of history, people lived close together, families shared rooms, workers slept near workplaces, travelers shared beds, servants lived near the people they served. The separation between waking and sleeping was often flexible, but the private bedroom introduced a new boundary. You could leave the common room and enter a quieter place. The architecture of the home began to reflect the needs of the individual, and as homes changed, beds changed with them. The old box bed had once been useful because it created warmth, but as rooms became better insulated, the need for complete enclosure became less important. The wooden doors could remain open, then disappear entirely. The curtains became lighter. Eventually, they became decorative. The bed was now surrounded by open air. This may sound like a small change, but psychologically, it was significant. The sleeper no longer needed to hide inside a wooden box. The room itself provided protection. The walls were enough. The door was enough. The house was becoming a larger sleeping shelter. Heating also played an important role. As methods of heating improved, people could maintain warmer interiors, the entire room could become comfortable. This reduced the need to create a tiny warm pocket around the bed. Instead of heating only the sleeper, the room itself could be heated. And when that happened, the bed no longer needed to be so enclosed. The same process affected windows. Better construction reduced drafts, glass became more widely available, shutters and curtains could control light and cold, the bedroom became a more controlled environment, a person could sleep without feeling every change in the weather outside. But comfort was only part of the story. The bedroom also became a symbol of identity. A person's bed could reveal their taste, their wealth, their social position. The wealthy might decorate their rooms with elaborate furniture, others used simpler beds, but the bedroom itself became increasingly personal. The objects inside belonged to the individual or family: clothing, books, personal possessions, small decorative items. The room became a reflection of the person who lived there. This was very different from sleeping in a crowded hall. There, the sleeping space belonged to everyone. In a private bedroom, the atmosphere could be controlled: the light, the temperature, the furniture, the silence, and perhaps most importantly, the door. A closed door could create a feeling of separation that earlier generations rarely experienced. Behind it, the outside world could wait. The household could continue moving, people could talk, work, eat, and carry on with their lives. But inside the bedroom, the sleeper was alone, or at least, more alone than before. This growing privacy also changed the relationship between couples. A married couple could have a room of their own. The bed was no longer necessarily surrounded by children, servants, or other relatives. The bedroom became associated with intimacy, with family life, and with personal rest. Yet this change did not happen equally for everyone. Poor families continued to live in crowded homes. Many people still shared sleeping spaces. Workers often lived close to their jobs, and travelers still slept wherever they could find room. The private bedroom remained a privilege for many, but the idea had taken root. A home should have a place where people sleep, and that place should ideally be quiet, warm, and private. The old sleeping arrangements were slowly becoming memories. The wooden box bed survived in some regions. The shared bed remained common in many households. The chair still offered a place for exhausted travelers, but the direction of history was unmistakable. The bedroom was becoming separate from the rest of life, and with that separation came a new understanding of sleep. It was no longer simply something that happened when the day's work ended. It was becoming something worth designing for: a comfortable mattress, a quiet room, a warm blanket, a private door. All of these things were gradually becoming part of the ideal sleeping environment, and as the centuries passed, that ideal would continue to evolve. The bedroom would become quieter, the bed would become softer, and the sleeping space would become more personal than ever before. The old wooden boxes would remain behind, but their purpose had been transformed. What began as a way to survive the cold had helped inspire the private bedroom itself, and now, as we approach the final stages of this long journey, the bed is about to undergo its most familiar transformation. It will leave behind many of its older forms, and begin to resemble the bed waiting for us in the modern world. The old wooden box has almost vanished, the heavy curtains have been pushed aside, the crowded sleeping hall has become a private room, and the simple straw mattress has slowly evolved into something softer, something more familiar. As we enter the final stages of this long journey, the bed is beginning to look remarkably close to the one we know today, but this transformation did not happen overnight. The modern bed was built from centuries of small changes. Each generation added something: a better frame, a softer mattress, a stronger fabric, a more comfortable sleeping position, and gradually, the strange sleeping spaces of the past became part of history. One of the most important changes was the separation of the bed from the floor. This may sound obvious now, but raising the body above the ground had always been useful. It protected against cold, it reduced contact with damp surfaces, it created space beneath the bed, and it made cleaning easier. As furniture making improved, bed frames became stronger and more stable. Woodworkers could create structures that supported heavier mattresses. The bed became a permanent piece of furniture, not something temporary. Not simply a wooden platform covered with straw, but a carefully designed object. Mattresses also changed. The old straw-filled sack remained common for a long time, but better fillings gradually became available. Feathers offered softness. Wool provided warmth. Hair could create a firmer surface. Different materials could be combined, and the mattress itself became thicker. Instead of simply lying on a hard platform, the sleeper could sink gently into the bedding. This changed the entire experience of nighttime. The body no longer had to adapt completely to the bed was beginning to adapt to the body. That idea would become extremely important. The purpose of the mattress was no longer just to keep you off the floor, it was to support you, to distribute your weight, to reduce pressure, to help the body relax. These ideas may seem obvious today, but they represented centuries of experimentation. People had been learning, slowly, what made sleep easier. The modern bed also benefited from changes in architecture. Bedrooms became more common, walls became more reliable, windows became better, heating improved, the room itself became more comfortable. This meant the bed could become simpler. It no longer needed heavy curtains to survive every cold night. It no longer needed thick wooden doors. The room provided the protection. The bed could remain open, and the sleeper could finally see the entire space around them. The psychological difference was enormous. Imagine the contrast: a person sleeping inside a dark wooden box, and a person lying in an open bed beneath a quiet ceiling. The first is enclosed, protected, but confined. The second is exposed to the room, yet surrounded by a home designed to protect them. The modern bed emerged from this balance: comfort without complete enclosure, privacy without isolation, warmth without needing to hide inside wooden walls. And as the bedroom became more private, the bed became increasingly personal. People could choose their bedding, their mattress, their blankets, their pillows. The sleeping space became an expression of individual comfort. This was very different from earlier centuries. A person could now expect a certain level of softness, a certain level of warmth, and, increasingly, a certain amount of privacy. But even the modern bed retained traces of its ancestors: the raised frame, the mattress, the blankets, the pillow, the curtains. In some cases, all of these elements had existed before. They had simply been improved, rearranged, and combined. The modern bed was therefore not a completely new invention. It was the result of thousands of small decisions made by ordinary people. People who were cold, people who were tired, people who wanted softer bedding, people who wanted to sleep without drafts, people who wanted a little more privacy. The history of the bed is, in many ways, the history of human comfort, and it is also the history of human imagination, because people did not simply accept the sleeping spaces they inherited. They changed them, they experimented, they built, they redesigned, they searched for something better. The old box bed was one answer, the curtain bed was another, the straw mattress was another, the feather bed was another, the private bedroom was another, and eventually, all these ideas came together. The bed became open, soft, raised, private, comfortable, a place designed not simply to survive the night, but to enjoy it. And yet, perhaps the most fascinating part of this story is how ordinary the modern bed feels to us. We climb into one without thinking about it. We pull the blanket over ourselves. We place our head on a pillow, and we close our eyes. It feels natural, almost inevitable, but history reminds us that it was never inevitable. For most of human existence, people slept differently. They slept on floors, on straw, on wooden platforms, inside boxes, behind curtains, in crowded rooms, and sometimes, when circumstances demanded it, sitting upright in chairs. The bed beneath us today is the final result of countless generations trying to make the night a little easier, a little warmer, a little safer, a little softer. And now, as the story approaches its end, we return to where we began, to the strange wooden box, the place that once seemed so unusual. Perhaps it no longer looks quite so strange, because we now understand why people climbed inside. They were not trying to make sleep complicated, they were trying to make it comfortable, they were trying to keep the cold away. They were trying to create privacy, they were trying to feel safe. In the end, the wooden box was simply one step on the long road toward the bed we know today. And perhaps, as we prepare to leave these old sleeping rooms behind, there is one final question worth asking. After centuries of changing beds, private bedrooms, soft mattresses, and comfortable blankets, have we really changed the way humans sleep, or have we simply found more comfortable ways to do exactly what our ancestors did every night: close our eyes, disappear into darkness, and wait for morning? The house is quiet now. The journey that began inside a strange wooden box has finally brought us to a familiar place: a bed, soft blankets, a pillow beneath the head, a quiet room surrounding the sleeper, perhaps a faint light beyond the curtains, and the comforting knowledge that morning will eventually come. It is easy to look back at the sleeping habits of earlier centuries and wonder how people managed. How could someone rest inside a narrow wooden box? How could a family share one crowded bed? How could anyone sleep sitting upright in a chair? How could a thin layer of straw possibly feel like a mattress? And yet, to the people who lived those lives, these things were not necessarily strange. They were ordinary, they were familiar, they were simply the way the world worked. A wooden box could feel safe, a curtain could feel protective, a shared bed could feel warm, a straw mattress could feel comfortable enough, and a chair could become a bed when there was nowhere else to sleep. Human beings have always adapted. We adapt to the weather, to the architecture around us, to the materials we can afford, to the customs we inherit, and, perhaps most importantly, we adapt to the night. For thousands of years, people have watched the sun disappear. They have listened as the world became quieter. They have felt the temperature fall, and they have searched for a place where they could close their eyes without fear. Sometimes that place was a cave, sometimes a hut, sometimes a crowded room, sometimes a wooden box, and sometimes only a simple chair beside a dying fire. The shape of the bed changed, but the human need behind it never did. We wanted warmth, we wanted safety, we wanted rest, and we wanted, even if only for a few hours, to escape the endless demands of the waking world. Perhaps this is why the history of sleep feels so strangely personal. We may live differently from the people of centuries ago. Our bedrooms are warmer, our mattresses are softer, our pillows are carefully designed. Our homes protect us from the weather, and yet, when night arrives, the essential experience remains almost unchanged. The room becomes dark, the body becomes tired, the mind begins to slow, and eventually, we surrender ourselves to sleep. Our ancestors did exactly the same. They simply did it in different surroundings. A medieval family might climb into a wooden box bed, a traveler might fall asleep upright in a chair, a poor worker might curl up on a straw mattress, a wealthy person might disappear beneath layers of feather bedding. Different beds, different rooms, different centuries, but the same quiet human need, rest, and perhaps there is something comforting in knowing this. When you lie down tonight, you are participating in one of humanity's oldest traditions. The details have changed, the furniture has changed, the technology has changed, but the moment itself remains familiar, the closing of the eyes, the slowing of the breath, the gradual disappearance of the world, the strange border between waking and dreaming. That border has existed for as long as human beings have existed, and no matter how advanced our beds become, sleep remains mysterious. We still cannot completely control it. We cannot command ourselves to dream a certain dream. We cannot know exactly where the mind travels when consciousness fades. We simply close our eyes and trust that we will return. Perhaps this is the greatest connection between us and the people who slept inside those ancient wooden boxes. They did not know what the night would bring, neither do we. They entered darkness, so do we. They listened to the quiet sounds around them, so do we, and eventually, they surrendered to sleep, just as we do. The wooden boxes may be gone, the straw mattresses have disappeared from most homes, the crowded sleeping rooms have become private bedrooms, and the upright chair is no longer considered an ordinary place to spend the night. But the memory of those sleeping spaces remains. They remind us that comfort is not something humanity discovered all at once. It was built slowly, one blanket at a time, one mattress at a time, one quiet improvement after another, and perhaps, somewhere in the future, people will look back at our own bedrooms with the same curiosity. They may wonder why we slept the way we did, why we built our beds in certain shapes, why we needed certain blankets, why we surrounded ourselves with particular objects before closing our eyes. They may find our habits just as strange as we find the wooden box bed. And perhaps they will ask the same question: how did people ever sleep like that? The thought is strangely comforting, because it reminds us that history never truly ends. Every generation believes its way of living is normal, every generation creates new habits, and every generation eventually becomes the past. Tonight, however, we are still here, the night is still around us, the room is quiet, and somewhere, perhaps, another person is preparing for sleep. Maybe they are climbing into a soft modern bed, maybe they are lying beneath a heavy blanket. Maybe they are listening to the same quiet sounds that have accompanied human sleep for thousands of years: wind against a window, rain on a roof, a distant voice, the gentle creak of an old house settling in darkness. Long ago, another sleeper might have heard those sounds from inside a wooden box. Tonight, we hear them from somewhere else, but the feeling is almost the same. The day is over, the world can wait, and for a few peaceful hours, we can simply rest. So, wherever you are tonight, whatever kind of bed is waiting for you, I hope it is warm, I hope it is comfortable. And I hope, for a little while, you can forget the noise of the waking world. Let your eyes grow heavy, let your breathing become slow, and allow the centuries to become quiet. The wooden doors of the old box bed close gently. The final candle disappears, the ancient house falls silent, and somewhere between history and dreams, the night continues until morning, and when you finally wake, perhaps you will look at your own bed a little differently. Because beneath its soft surface lies a story thousands of years old, a story of cold nights, crowded rooms, straw mattresses, wooden boxes, curtained beds, and countless generations of people searching for the perfect place to close their eyes. And that leaves us with one final thought. If humans have spent thousands of years changing the places where they sleep, what might our beds look like 1,000 years from now? Would future people find our bedrooms just as strange as we find the wooden boxes of the past? Perhaps, and perhaps, no matter how much the bed changes, someone, somewhere, will still climb into it at the end of a long day, close their eyes, and quietly wonder, what dreams are waiting on the other side of the night?